May 3, 2007, 10:00 p.m., Praia da Luz, Portugal. Kate McCann pushed open the door to apartment 5A. She'd left her 3 children sleeping there 90 minutes earlier, while she and her husband dined with friends just 180 feet away. The twins were still in their cots, but Madeleine's bed was empty. The window was open. The shutters had been forced up from the outside, and 3-year-old Madeleine Beth McCann had vanished into the Portuguese night. What happened in that holiday apartment would become the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history. An investigation spanning 3 countries, costing over £13 million, and nearly 2 decades of searching. Thousands of reported sightings, hundreds of suspects, millions of words written in newspapers across the globe. Yet almost 19 years later, no one knows for certain what happened to Madeleine McCann. This is part 1 of our 3-part investigation into one of the most haunting mysteries of the 21st century. Tonight, we uncover what happened on that fateful night, the initial investigation that went catastrophically wrong, the media frenzy that destroyed lives, and the shocking moment when the grieving parents themselves became the prime suspects in their own daughter's disappearance. Before we begin this investigation, I need to make something absolutely clear. This isn't just another true crime story. This isn't entertainment. Madeleine McCann was a real child with a real family who still searches for answers nearly 2 decades later. Her twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, grew up without their sister. They turned 18 in 2023, having spent their entire conscious lives with Madeleine missing. Throughout this 3-part series, we'll focus exclusively on verified facts. We'll respect the victims, and we'll examine the systemic failures, investigative missteps, and media circus that allowed this case to remain unsolved for nearly 20 years. If you appreciate in-depth, fact-based investigations like this, make sure to subscribe to Forensic Disconnect and hit that notification bell. We unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Madeleine Beth McCann was born on May 12, 2003, in Leicester, England. She was a healthy, happy baby with blonde hair and a distinctive right eye, a coloboma, a rare condition where part of the iris is missing, creating a black mark in the blue of her eye. This unique feature would later become crucial to identification efforts. Her parents, Kate Marie Healy and Gerald Patrick McCann, called Jerry, were both physicians working for Britain's National Health Service. Jerry, originally from Glasgow, specialized in cardiology at Glenfield Hospital in Leicester. Kate, from Liverpool, had worked as a general practitioner before choosing part-time work to spend more time with her children. They lived in Rothley, Leicestershire, a picturesque village in the English Midlands, where neighbors knew each other and children played safely in the streets. The McCanns had met in Glasgow in 1993, both training to become doctors. They married in 1998 and built a life centered around their careers and growing family. In February 2005, Kate gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Sean and Amelie. By all accounts, by every testimony from friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors, the McCanns were devoted, loving parents. Jerry was known as a dedicated father who played with his children every chance he got. Kate had reduced her working hours specifically to be more present. Friends described them as a tight-knit family unit. There was nothing in their history or behavior that suggested anything other than responsible, caring parents. This context becomes critically important later, when the entire world would turn against them. In late April 2007, the McCanns planned a week-long holiday to Portugal's Algarve region with close friends. The trip was organized through Mark Warner, a British holiday company specializing in family vacations. The Mark Warner Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz had been chosen because it offered childcare services, kids clubs, and family-friendly amenities. The group included the McCanns and 7 friends, all couples from Leicestershire, plus their children. In total, 9 adults and 8 children under 8. The media would later dub the adults the Tapas 7, a nickname that would stick throughout the investigation. The group included David and Fiona Payne with their 2 children, Russell O'Brien and Jane Tanner with their 2 children, Matthew and Rachel Oldfield with their daughter, and Diane Webster, Fiona's mother. These were not strangers. These were close friends, professional people, doctors and medical professionals who had vacationed together before. This matters because conspiracy theories would later suggest this group had formed some coordinated cover-up. Understanding who these people actually were helps put those theories into perspective. The McCanns arrived in Praia da Luz on April 28, 2007. Praia da Luz, meaning Beach of Light, is a small coastal village in the western Algarve, about 6 kilometers from Lagos. In 2007, it had roughly 3,000 residents, swelling during tourist season with British, German, and Dutch holidaymakers. It was quiet, safe, picturesque. Whitewashed buildings, narrow streets, a beautiful beach, family-run restaurants. The kind of place where serious crime was virtually unheard of. The McCanns were assigned apartment 5A, a two-bedroom ground-floor unit in Block 5. The apartment was accessed via a small gate and pathway to the front door, with rear patio doors opening onto a communal area near the pool and tapas restaurant. The apartment had a small living room, kitchenette, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. The master bedroom had patio doors opening onto a side area. The children's bedroom had a window facing the street and parking area. This layout would become one of the most scrutinized aspects of the case. For the first few days, the vacation was exactly what they'd hoped for. Madeleine, Amelie, and Sean attended the resort's kids club. Madeleine, according to all reports, loved it. She made friends, painted, played, laughed. The adults relaxed by the pool, played tennis, caught up with friends. Evenings were spent dining together at the tapas restaurant, children put to bed around 7:30 or 8 p.m., adults gathering for dinner around 8:30 p.m. May 3, 2007, started like any other day. That morning, Madeleine attended kids club as usual. Photographs from that day show her smiling, wearing a pink sun hat, carrying her tennis racket. She looks happy, carefree. That afternoon, the family spent time at the pool. Jerry played with all 3 children in the water. Later, around 5:30 p.m., Madeleine and the twins had their tea in the tapas area. The last photographs ever taken of Madeleine McCann alive show her wearing a pink smock top, eating with her family. Everything was normal. After tea, the family returned to apartment 5A. Bath time. Madeleine had requested a story. Kate read to her. By approximately 7:30 p.m., all 3 children were in bed. Madeleine in her bed, wearing pink Eeyore pajamas. The twins in their travel cots in the same room. The bedroom door was left slightly ajar. The window was closed and locked. The shutters were down and secured. Kate checked one final time. All 3 sleeping peacefully. The McCanns then spent the next hour unwinding before dinner. They had established a routine during their stay. Each evening, after putting children to bed, the 9 adults would meet for dinner at the tapas restaurant. From their table, they could see the front of Block 5, though not the apartment windows directly. But they were close. The adults took turns leaving the table every 30 to 40 minutes to walk back and physically check on the children, listening at doors, occasionally entering to look. This checking routine became one of the most controversial aspects. Some understood it as a common British holiday practice. Others, particularly in Portugal and continental Europe, were shocked that parents had left children so young alone at all. The cultural difference in parenting approaches became a significant factor in public perception. But on May 3rd, the McCanns were following their established routine with no reason to think this night would be different. Around 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry left apartment 5A for dinner. Kate made one last check. All sleeping. They exited via the rear patio doors, pulling them closed but leaving them unlocked for easy re-entry during checks. The table accommodated all 9 adults. It was a pleasant evening. The restaurant was busy but not packed. Conversations flowed, wine was ordered, food was served. Everyone was relaxed. At approximately 9:05 p.m., Jerry excused himself for the first check. He walked to Block 5, entering through the unlocked patio doors. He moved quietly and stood at the children's bedroom door. He didn't turn on the light. He listened. Silence. He pushed the door slightly open and looked in. In the dim light, he could see the twins in their cots. He could see Madeleine's bed, though he later said he couldn't see her specifically because she was lying at an angle and covers obscured her. Everything appeared fine. He closed the door to slightly ajar and left via the patio doors. On his walk back, Jerry encountered Jeremy Wilkins, a British holidaymaker he'd been playing tennis with. Wilkins was walking his baby in a stroller. The 2 men stopped and chatted on Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins, the street alongside Block 5. Wilkins would later tell investigators he remembered this conversation clearly. The time was approximately 9:10 to 9:15 p.m. He remembered seeing another member of the McCann group walking past them. He didn't realize until later that this person, Jane Tanner, had apparently seen something critical. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner left the restaurant to check on her children. Her partner, Russell O'Brien, had already left because one of their children was ill and crying. Jane walked up the street toward the apartments. As she passed the corner near apartment 5A, she saw a man on the opposite side of the street walking quickly, carrying a child. The child appeared to be wearing pink or light-colored pajamas, arms hanging down limp as if asleep. Jane noticed this but didn't think it suspicious. She assumed it was a father carrying his own child back from somewhere. She walked past, checked on her children, and returned to the restaurant. She mentioned it later at dinner, but only in passing. Nobody thought much of it. It was only after Kate's discovery that this sighting took on monumental significance. Jane Tanner had potentially witnessed Madeleine being abducted. She had been within feet of the abductor. The timing lined up almost perfectly. Jerry had just left apartment 5A. He was standing on the street talking to Jeremy Wilkins at the exact moment Jane walked past and saw the man. Neither Jerry nor Jeremy noticed him. They were facing each other, backs to the direction he was walking, but Jane saw him. Later, under hypnosis and working with police artists, Jane described the man in detail. Mid-30s, medium height, dark hair, light-colored trousers, dark jacket. The child he was carrying wore pink pajamas. Madeleine was wearing pink pajamas. At around 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield offered to check on the McCann children while checking his own. He approached apartment 5A and listened at the door. He could hear nothing. He opened the door slightly and looked in. From his position in the doorway, he could see the twins clearly in their cots, sleeping. But from where he stood, he could not see Madeleine's bed. It was at an angle behind the door, obscured when only partially open. He didn't enter the room. He'd seen the twins. Everything seemed fine. He closed the door and left. This decision, this split-second choice not to step fully into the room, would haunt Matthew Oldfield for years. If he had taken 3 more steps, if he had looked around the door, he would have seen Madeleine's empty bed. He would have raised the alarm 30 minutes earlier. 30 minutes that might have made all the difference. Back at the restaurant, dinner continued. More food, more wine, conversations about children, work, plans for the next day. Everything was normal. At approximately 10 p.m., Kate McCann stood up. It was her turn to check. She walked from the restaurant toward apartment 5A. It was dark now, full night, but the complex was well lit. She reached the apartment and entered through the patio doors. Immediately, instantly, she knew something was wrong. She felt it before she saw it. The children's bedroom door was wide open, not slightly ajar as they'd left it, fully open. A breeze was coming from the room, cool air that shouldn't have been there. Kate's heart began to race. She walked quickly to the bedroom. The twins were there, still in their cots, still sleeping, but Madeleine's bed was empty. The covers were pulled back. Cuddle Cat, Madeleine's favorite stuffed toy, was on the pillow where she always kept it, but Madeleine was gone. Kate's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe she was in the bathroom. Maybe she'd wandered into the other bedroom. Kate checked everywhere. Bathroom, empty. Under beds, nothing. Wardrobes, nothing. Master bedroom, empty. Then she saw it. The window in the children's bedroom, which had been closed and locked, was now open. The shutters, which had been down and secured, had been raised from the outside. Someone had been in the apartment. Someone had taken Madeleine. Kate McCann's scream echoed across the Ocean Club Resort. "Madeleine's gone! Someone's taken her!" In her panic, in her terror, she did what millions of parents might do in that moment of pure fear. She ran. She left the twins sleeping in their cots and sprinted back to the restaurant, screaming, crying, incoherent with panic. The dinner table erupted into chaos. Jerry jumped up and ran toward the apartment. The other men followed. Fiona Payne stayed with Kate, trying to comfort her, trying to understand what had happened. Within minutes, resort staff had been alerted. Within 15 minutes, dozens of people were searching the resort complex, checking gardens, looking in unlocked cars, searching the beach, anywhere a small child might be. At approximately 10:15 p.m., resort staff called the Portuguese police. The Guarda Nacional Republicana, the GNR, were notified. A missing child, British, 3 years old. Officers from the local station in Lagos were dispatched. They arrived at approximately 11 p.m., nearly an hour after Kate's discovery, but the GNR were not detectives. The real investigators, the Policia Judiciaria, weren't notified until later. They didn't arrive until approximately 11:15 p.m. By that time, over an hour had passed since Kate found Madeleine missing. Over an hour during which evidence was being lost, contaminated, destroyed. What happened in that first hour would cripple the investigation for years and arguably doom any chance of solving the case quickly. The Portuguese police made a series of catastrophic decisions. First, apartment 5A was not immediately secured as a crime scene. For hours, people walked in and out. Family members, friends, resort staff, police officers, local volunteers. Dozens of people, trampling through what should have been a sterile crime scene. If there had been fingerprints on the window shutters, they were smeared. If there had been hair or fiber evidence, it was mixed with DNA from dozens of others. If there had been footprints, they were walked over and destroyed. Forensic experts who later reviewed the case said this was the single biggest failure. You can't go back and recollect evidence. You can't undo contamination. Second, no borders were closed. Faro Airport, 55 miles away, received no alert. No additional security. No passenger list checked. The Spanish border, less than an hour's drive, had no roadblocks. No checkpoints. If this was a planned abduction, if someone had taken Madeleine intending to traffic her or leave the country, the first hours were absolutely critical. Nothing was done to prevent that. Third, the investigation proceeded on the assumption this was a missing child case, not an abduction. Portuguese police later defended this, saying they had to consider all possibilities, including that Madeleine had wandered off. But Kate had been clear from the beginning. The window was open. The shutters were up. Someone had been in the apartment. Yet the investigation proceeded slowly, cautiously. Every hour that passed without treating this as an abduction was an hour in which the trail grew colder. By the morning of May 4th, less than 12 hours after Madeleine's disappearance, the story had made international headlines. British newspapers ran front-page stories. Television crews from Britain, Europe, and America began descending on Praia da Luz. The quiet fishing village was about to become the center of the biggest media storm of the decade. By May 5th, there were more journalists in Praia da Luz than residents. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Cameras pointed at apartment 5A. The McCanns' nightmare was being broadcast to the entire world. Portuguese police began formally interviewing the McCanns and Tapas 7 on May 4th at Polícia Judiciária headquarters in Portimão. The interviews were conducted in Portuguese with British interpreters. Questions asked in Portuguese, translated to English, witnesses answered in English, answers translated back to Portuguese, typed in Portuguese, and verbally translated back to English for witnesses to review and sign. This created numerous opportunities for misunderstanding and small errors that would later be blown out of proportion. A word translated slightly differently. A detail remembered in one interview and clarified in another appearing as an inconsistency. Kate later described the experience as surreal and frustrating. The police focused on several areas. First, why had the McCanns and friends left such young children alone in unlocked apartments? This was a cultural clash. In Britain, particularly among certain social classes, this checking routine was not uncommon. But in Portugal and much of continental Europe, leaving children alone like this was considered neglectful at best. Second, the timeline. Police wanted exact times for everything. The goal was to establish precise sequence, but human memory doesn't work with that level of precision, especially during crisis. Third, Jane Tanner's sighting. When exactly? Where exactly? What did he look like? Jane worked with police artists to create a composite sketch. The description was fairly detailed but also generic. A man in his 30s with dark hair wearing light trousers and a dark jacket could match thousands of men in Portugal. Fourth, inconsistencies. Police were already looking for contradictions. One that would be picked apart involved how the McCanns accessed the apartment during checks. In Jerry's first statement on May 4th, he said they'd entered through the locked front door using their key. In a second interview on May 10th, he said he'd entered through unlocked patio doors. To conspiracy theorists, this looked like changing his story. The actual explanation was simple. During the first part of the week, they used the front door. But it was next to the children's bedroom and they worried about noise waking them. So partway through the week, they started using the quieter patio doors, leaving them unlocked for easy access. This was completely reasonable, but without context, it looked suspicious. Another detail raising questions was Kate's decision to run back to the restaurant instead of using her mobile phone. To anyone who's experienced genuine panic, the answer is obvious. Rational thought goes out the window. You act on pure instinct. Kate saw her daughter was missing and ran for help. She didn't think about her phone. She didn't think about the twins. She just ran. But to investigators looking for suspicious behavior, this decision was questioned. By mid-May, just 2 weeks after Madeleine's disappearance, Portuguese media had begun to turn against the McCanns. Opinion pieces appeared questioning their parenting. Were they being truthful? What were they hiding? British tabloids, smelling blood, began to follow suit. Then, on May 14, 2007, 12 days after Madeleine vanished, Portuguese police named their first official suspect, Robert Murat. Murat was a 34-year-old British-Portuguese property consultant who lived in Praia da Luz with his mother. Born in Hammersmith, West London, but raised in Portugal, he worked in property and spoke both languages fluently. Murat had a daughter in England, around Madeleine's age, from a previous relationship. When he heard about Madeleine's disappearance, he volunteered to help, offering his services as interpreter. The Policia Judiciaria had even briefly used him in this capacity. But Laurie Campbell, a journalist from the Sunday Mirror, became suspicious of Murat's behavior. She thought he was inserting himself into the investigation, showing too much interest. She reported her suspicions to police. Murat lived in Casa Liliana, his mother's house, just 150 yards from apartment 5A. That proximity alone made him a person of interest. 3 members of the Tapa 7, Fiona Payne, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield, were shown photographs and identified Robert Murat. They said they'd seen him near apartment 5A on the night of May 3rd, after Madeleine's disappearance during the initial search. An Ocean Club nanny and 2 British holidaymakers gave similar statements. But Murat and his mother insisted he'd been home all evening, never leaving the house. On May 14th, Robert Murat was declared an arguido formal suspect status under Portuguese law. Being named an arguido comes with legal rights, but also heavy stigma. Murat's life was destroyed overnight. Police searched Casa Liliana top to bottom. They drained the swimming pool. They seized computers, phones, videotapes, his car. They interviewed friends, family, his ex-wife. They looked at finances, internet history, travel records. They found nothing linking Robert Murat to Madeleine's disappearance. No forensic evidence, no digital evidence, no witness placing him at apartment 5A at the time of abduction, no motive, no connection. But the damage was done. British tabloids camped outside his house. Headlines screamed his name. Murat couldn't leave home without being photographed, followed, harassed. His reputation was in ruins, and he was innocent. Meanwhile, the search continued across Europe and beyond. The McCanns launched an international campaign. Posters showed Madeleine's photograph and distinctive eye marking. Age progression images were created. The Find Madeleine website was established. Celebrities got involved. David Beckham appealed for information. J.K. Rowling donated money. The Pope blessed Madeleine's photograph. Sightings were reported from Morocco to Australia. Every single one was investigated. Every single one led nowhere. Then, exactly 100 days after Madeleine's disappearance, on August 11, 2007, Portuguese police made a public statement that shocked the world. They acknowledged, for the first time, that Madeleine might be dead. Up until this point, the investigation had proceeded assuming Madeleine had been abducted and was alive somewhere. But now, authorities were saying they believed she might have died on May 3rd. The question was how, where, and who was responsible. The answer Portuguese investigators arrived at would tear the McCann family apart. On August 2nd, 2007, 3 months after Madeleine's disappearance, British police handler Martin Grime arrived in Praia da Luz with 2 highly specialized Springer Spaniels. These were not ordinary police dogs. The first was Eddie, an enhanced victim recovery dog trained to detect human decomposition. Eddie had been used in over 200 operational searches and, according to his handler, never recorded a false positive. When Eddie alerted, there was cadaver scent. The second was Keela, a crime scene investigation dog trained to detect minute traces of human blood, even blood that had been cleaned. Eddie was brought into apartment 5A. Within minutes, he alerted. He barked, signaling he detected cadaver scent. The location was behind the living room sofa, near the patio doors. They continued through the apartment. Eddie alerted again in the corner of the children's bedroom near the door, then on the veranda outside the parents' bedroom, then in the garden area below. 4 separate alerts indicating human decomposition. Keela was brought in next. Behind the sofa where Eddie had alerted, Keela alerted. She froze in place, her signal for detecting blood. She also alerted on a curtain in the same area. But then came the truly controversial part. Eddie was given items belonging to the McCanns to smell. He alerted on Kate McCann's clothing. He alerted on Cuddle Cat, Madeleine's favorite toy that Kate had been carrying everywhere. If the dogs were accurate, and their track record suggested they were, then a body had been in apartment 5A, and Kate had been in contact with that body. Portuguese investigators began developing a theory. Chief Inspector Gonçalo Amaral, leading the Portuguese investigation, believed the evidence pointed to a scenario where Madeleine had died accidentally in apartment 5A on the evening of May 3rd. possibly before the McCanns left for dinner. Perhaps she'd fallen. Perhaps she'd had a medical emergency. Amaral theorized that Kate and Jerry, both intelligent professionals, realized that if they reported an accidental death after leaving 3 small children alone in an unlocked apartment, they would face criminal charges for negligence. Their careers would be over. They might lose custody of the twins, so instead they hid the body and staged an abduction. This theory had enormous problems. First, when could this have happened? Multiple witnesses had seen the twins sleeping at 9:30 p.m. If Madeleine died before 8:30 p.m. when the McCanns left for dinner, where had her body been during checks? How could they have hidden a body while sitting at dinner surrounded by friends? Second, how did they dispose of it? The McCanns were under constant media surveillance from May 4th onward. Cameras trained on them 24/7. When could they have moved a body unseen? Third, the rental car. Eddie had alerted in the McCanns' rental car, rented on May 27th, 24 days after Madeleine's disappearance. If she died on May 3rd, how did her scent get into a car that didn't exist until nearly a month later? The theory required an elaborate, perfectly executed cover-up involving multiple people, carried out under intense media scrutiny, without leaving concrete forensic evidence. It required Kate and Jerry to be simultaneously grief-stricken parents and cold-blooded killers. But Portuguese investigators were convinced, or at least Gonçalo Amaral was. DNA samples from apartment 5A, from the rental car, from Cuddle Cat were sent to the Forensic Science Service Laboratory in Birmingham for analysis. The results came back in early September 2007. They were inconclusive. Some genetic markers were consistent with Madeleine's DNA profile, but those same markers were also consistent with millions of people who share those particular genetic traits. The samples were partial, degraded, and mixed with DNA from multiple sources because of the contaminated crime scene. The evidence was not definitive. It proved nothing. But Portuguese investigators were not deterred. On September 6th and 7th, 2007, they made a move that would shock the world. Kate and Jerry McCann were called to Polícia Judiciária headquarters in Portimão for formal interrogation. Kate was questioned on September 6th. The interrogation lasted 11 hours. 11 hours of relentless questioning, conducted in Portuguese through interpreters, while Kate sat exhausted, traumatized, desperate for news of her daughter, being told by police they believed she was responsible for Madeleine's death. The interrogators laid out their theory. They told her they believed Madeleine had died in the apartment. They believed Kate had hidden the body. They told her the dogs had alerted on her clothing, on Cuddle Cat. They told her about the DNA evidence, presenting it as far more conclusive than it was. Then they made an offer. If Kate confessed to accidentally killing Madeleine, they could arrange for her to be charged with a lesser offense, manslaughter perhaps. She could face a reduced sentence, maybe just 2 years. All she had to do was tell the truth. Admit what happened. Tell them where Madeleine's body was. Kate McCann refused. She maintained, as she had from the beginning, that she did not harm Madeleine, that Madeleine had been abducted, that someone had taken her daughter. She refused to confess to something she hadn't done, even when offered a deal that could have ended the nightmare quickly. The interrogation continued, hour after hour. The same questions, the same accusations. Kate broke down multiple times but never wavered. Jerry was interrogated on September 7th. His session was shorter but no less intense. He was presented with the same theory, the same supposed evidence. He too refused to confess. He too maintained that Madeleine had been abducted. By the end of September 7th, both Kate and Jerry McCann had been declared arguidos, formal suspects in their own daughter's disappearance. The news broke internationally within hours. McCanns named as suspects. Parents questioned over Maddie's death. The media, which had been sympathetic for months, turned viciously. Portuguese tabloids had been building to this for weeks. On June 30th, Sol, a Portuguese weekly, had published a long article titled "The Madeleine Case a Pact of Silence," claiming without evidence that the McCanns and Tapas 7 were hiding something, suggesting they'd formed a pact to protect each other, implying Jane Tanner's sighting had been fabricated. The article was defamatory and irresponsible, but it set the tone. By September 2007, Portuguese media were publishing increasingly outrageous theories. Some claimed the McCanns and Tapas 7 were swingers engaged in sexual activity while children slept. Others claimed the McCanns had been sedating their children with drugs, that Madeleine had overdosed and they'd covered it up. Still others suggested they'd sold Madeleine to child traffickers. None had any basis in evidence. None were supported by anything other than wild speculation, but they spread like wildfire, particularly online. British tabloids followed the Portuguese lead. The Daily Express ran dozens of front-page stories suggesting the McCanns were involved. Other papers published leaked details from the Portuguese investigation. Kate's diary, seized by police in August 2007, was published in excerpts by Correio da Manhã. The publication was illegal. A Portuguese judge had ruled the seizure was a privacy violation and ordered copies destroyed. But the newspaper published anyway, and British papers reprinted the excerpts. The diary entries were heartbreaking. Kate wrote about struggles with motherhood, about feeling overwhelmed at times with 3 children under 4, about moments of frustration. Every parent has these feelings. Every honest parent will admit to moments of frustration. But the media twisted these normal expressions of parental stress into evidence of something sinister. The McCanns, grieving parents searching for their missing daughter, had become suspects, pariahs, objects of hatred. Public opinion, especially in Portugal but increasingly in Britain, turned sharply against them. Online forums exploded with conspiracy theories. Entire websites were dedicated to proving the McCanns' guilt. Amateur sleuths analyzed every photograph, every statement, every movement. The McCanns were accused of being actors, of faking grief, of being part of a massive cover-up. It was a moral panic, a witch hunt, driven by tabloid media and amplified by the internet. Through all this, Kate and Jerry maintained their innocence. They continued to search for Madeleine. They continued giving interviews, appealing for information, working with investigators. But the cloud of suspicion hung over them, suffocating and inescapable. Jerry struggled to work. Kate couldn't work at all. They were vilified in public, harassed by paparazzi, followed everywhere. And all the while, their daughter was missing, possibly in terrible danger, possibly dead. And the investigation that should have been focused on finding her was instead focused on destroying her parents. Then, on July 21, 2008, 10 months after the McCanns had been named suspects, Portugal's Attorney General, Fernando José Pinto Monteiro, made an announcement that should have ended the nightmare, but instead confirmed how badly the investigation had failed. After reviewing over 11,000 pages of case files, after examining all evidence, after considering every theory, the Attorney General's office concluded there was no evidence linking Kate or Jerry McCann to Madeleine's disappearance. There was no evidence linking Robert Murat either. The case was being archived, closed, arguido status lifted. The official statement was damning. No element of proof whatsoever was found which allows us to form any lucid, sensible, serious, and honest conclusion about the circumstances. After 15 months, after destroying reputations, after subjecting grieving parents to unimaginable scrutiny, Portuguese police admitted they had no idea what happened to Madeleine McCann. No suspects. No evidence. Nothing. On August 4, 2008, Portugal's Ministério Público released 17 case files containing 11,133 pages to the media. Reading through those files, what becomes clear is the sheer scale of investigative failure. Leads not followed. Witnesses not interviewed, evidence not collected, initial crime scene disaster compounded by months of missteps, obsessive focus on the parents while other possibilities were ignored. It was a masterclass in how not to conduct a major investigation. The McCanns returned to Britain in September 2007, shortly after being named suspects. They returned to Rothley with the twins, but without Madeleine. For 10 months, they lived under formal suspicion. When the case was finally closed in July 2008, there was relief, but no closure. Madeleine was still missing. The question of what happened remained unanswered. The damage to their lives, reputations, and mental health was incalculable. For 3 years, from 2008 to 2011, the investigation remained officially closed. Portuguese authorities had given up, but Kate and Jerry never gave up. They hired private investigators. They continued the Find Madeleine campaign. They gave interviews to keep Madeleine's face in public consciousness. They never stopped hoping. They never stopped searching. In May 2011, their persistence paid off unexpectedly. British Prime Minister David Cameron and Home Secretary Theresa May intervened directly. Following appeals from the McCanns and responding to public pressure, Cameron ordered the Metropolitan Police to review the entire investigation. This was unprecedented. British police don't normally investigate crimes in foreign countries, but this was not normal. The Met assigned a team to Operation Grange with a simple mandate: review everything, look at all evidence, consider all theories, find out what happened to Madeleine McCann. Operation Grange began work in May 2011. The team, led by Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, spent months reviewing Portuguese files, conducting interviews, and building their own understanding. In July 2013, 2 years into their review, the Metropolitan Police announced a significant shift. Unlike the Portuguese investigation, which ultimately focused on the parents, Operation Grange was treating the case as a criminal act by a stranger, most likely a planned abduction or burglary gone wrong. DCI Redwood pointed to the spike in local burglaries in the area in months before Madeleine's disappearance. There had been a fourfold increase in break-ins between January and May 2007. 2 burglaries had occurred in the McCanns block in the 17 days before May 3rd, both involving intruders entering through windows. The theory was that a burglar might have entered apartment 5A, either not knowing children were inside or specifically targeting the apartment, and abducted Madeleine when she woke up or when the plan went wrong. In October 2013, Operation Grange released e-fit images of several men they wanted to trace. One drew significant attention. It showed a man seen by an Irish family, the Smiths, carrying a child through Praia da Luz at approximately 10 p.m. on May 3rd, around the time Kate discovered Madeleine missing. The man was described as mid-30s, short brown hair, medium build, light-colored trousers. The child appeared asleep or unconscious. This sighting hadn't been given much attention during the Portuguese investigation, but Operation Grange considered it potentially more significant than Jane Tanner's. Following the British review and new lines of inquiry, Portuguese authorities reopened the case in October 2013. But despite renewed efforts, despite new theories and witnesses, years passed without a major breakthrough. Operation Grange identified 38 people of interest, including 12 British nationals. Leads were investigated across Europe. Potential sightings were followed. Nothing substantial emerged. The trail was cold. Too much time had passed. Too much evidence had been lost. Then, on June 3, 2020, 13 years after Madeleine vanished, German prosecutors made an announcement that reignited the entire case and gave the McCanns their first real hope in over a decade. They had identified a new prime suspect, a German national, a convicted sex offender with a history of crimes against children, a man who had been living in the Algarve in 2007, who had worked in Praia da Luz, who had been in the area on May 3rd. His name was Christian Bruckner. And German prosecutors didn't just say he was a suspect. They said they had evidence, concrete evidence, that Christian Bruckner had abducted and murdered Madeleine McCann. This is where part 1 ends. We've covered the disappearance, the catastrophic initial investigation that destroyed critical evidence, the dog alerts that led police to suspect the parents, the 10 months of hell the McCanns endured as formal suspects, the media circus that vilified grieving parents, and the eventual admission that Portuguese police had no idea what happened. But the story is far from over. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Christian Bruckner. Who is he? What is his criminal history? What evidence links him to Madeleine's disappearance? Why are German prosecutors convinced he's the killer? What did cell phone records reveal about his location on May 3, 2007? Why did he leave Portugal so suddenly the day after Madeleine vanished? And why, despite German prosecutors saying they're sure he murdered Madeleine McCann, has he never been charged? We'll examine the searches conducted in 2023 and 2025, his time in prison, his acquittal on other charges, his release, where he is now, and the chilling possibility that even if he's responsible, he may never face justice. If you want to see part 2, subscribe to Forensic Disconnect right now and hit that like button. This case is one of the most complex and controversial in modern history, and we're only getting started. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you believe Madeleine is still alive? Do you think Christian Bruckner is responsible? What do you think happened on May 3, 2007? Part 2 drops soon. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. I'm your host at Forensic Disconnect. We unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. Madeleine McCann has been missing for nearly 19 years. Her family still searches for answers. Her twin siblings grew up without her. And this story, her story, deserves to be told with facts, with respect, and with the truth. See you in part 2.